The world believes Marilyn Monroe passed away alone in her Brentwood home. What history never recorded was the desperate phone call she made hours earlier to a stranger she trusted with her final truth. What she gave him would turn his life into a decades-long act of silence. The phone rang at 3 o'clock in the morning, a sharp metallic sound that cut through the stagnant air of a small Hollywood apartment. It was not the casual call of a friend, it was the frantic, rhythmic ringing of a woman in a desperate situation. Though history would record that she was alone when she passed away, the truth was far more complex. A final, breathless outreach to a man who would become the sole witness to her last hours. Elias, a young reporter struggling to make a name for himself, fumbled for the receiver in the dark. His room was cramped, filled with the smell of old coffee and stacks of newspapers that he used for research. As the clock on the wall marked the time, he felt a sudden weight in his chest, sensing that this call was different from any he had received before. He stared at the black phone for a moment, his heart racing before finally lifting the receiver to his ear and pressing it against his face. When he answered, there was no greeting or introduction. Instead, there was a heavy silence followed by a trembling, breathy whisper. It was a voice recognized by millions, a voice that had been projected onto screens across the globe. But in this moment, without the studio lights and the makeup, it sounded thin and fragile. It sounded like a woman trapped in a situation she could no longer control. Her spirit exhausted by the constant pressure of her public life. She did not have to say her name, he knew it instantly. The way she spoke his name, a name he did not think she would ever know, sent a cold chill down his spine. She told him she was finished with the scripts and the rehearsed lines. She was tired of the camera flashes that made it impossible for anyone to see the actual human being standing in front of them. She described her life as a bird in a gilded cage, watched by people who saw her as a prize to be won, but never as a person who needed comfort. Her voice cracked as she spoke about the mask she wore every day. She told him about the nights she would stand in front of her mirror, washing off the layers of heavy makeup and watching the image of Marilyn Monroe disappear, leaving only Norma Jean. Scared, isolated, and wondering if anyone could ever love the woman beneath the fame. She admitted that the loneliness of being a star was more painful than the poverty she had experienced as a child. In poverty, she was at least treated as a human being. She told him she had a truth she had carried for far too long, a secret that was destroying her from the inside. She had chosen Elias because he was a stranger she had seen once in a press crowd, and she believed he had a face she could trust. She wanted him to be the keeper of her final testament. The rain began to hit the window, a steady sound that matched the rhythm of her breathing on the line. He promised he would meet her, his own voice shaking as he realized he was talking to the most famous woman in the world, yet someone who was utterly alone. He felt a protective instinct rise up in him, something that went beyond his career as a journalist. When he hung up, the silence of his apartment felt heavier than before. His hands were shaking, mirroring the fear he had heard in her voice. He knew that leaving his apartment that night would change the course of his life forever. He grabbed his leather satchel, the one with the broken buckle he never got around to fixing, and stepped out into the wet California night. The streets of Los Angeles were slick with rain, reflecting the neon signs of the city like spilled ink on a dark surface. He drove through the city with total focus, his windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour. The city felt empty and strange, as if the shadows themselves were watching his move. Every red light felt like an eternity, and every intersection offered a chance to turn back and forget the call had ever happened. He expected to see the glamour associated with a Hollywood icon, but the woman waiting in the back booth of the dim diner looked like a ghost in a trench coat. A flickering neon sign outside cast a blue light across the table, making the scene feel like a dream. The air inside was stagnant, smelling of old grease and the rain that had followed him in. There sat the woman the world adored, but up close, she was a person drowning in sorrow. Her platinum hair was tucked under a simple scarf, and her fingers, with chipped nail polish, gripped a ceramic mug as if it were the only thing keeping her anchored. Elias approached slowly, his footsteps quiet on the worn linoleum. He felt as if he were entering a different reality. The most famous face in history was hidden in a corner where the shadows were thickest, her head bowed in deep isolation. She signaled for him to sit. When she spoke, the breathy whisper she used for the public was gone, replaced by a low, steady voice filled with honesty. She told him she had spent her entire adult life acting as a mirror, reflecting whatever people wanted to see, the flirt, the star, or the joke, but tonight, she wanted to be the person she saw in the mirror when the lights were off and the house was quiet. She talked about Norma Jean, the orphan girl who still lived inside her, the girl who felt like an intruder in the grand, expensive rooms she now inhabited. She described the foster homes where she learned to smile even when she was hungry, and the moment she realized people only valued her for her surface, never for her soul. Elias watched her fumble with a glass of water and noticed a small bruise on her wrist. She leaned in, and the scent of her perfume cut through the heavy smell of the diner. "They think I am a doll," she whispered, her eyes meeting him with a sharpness that felt like a shock. It was a look that stripped away the years of publicity photos and artifice. She spoke of the blonde bombshell as a suit of armor she had built to survive, a costume to keep the world from seeing her actual pain. But that armor had become a prison. She told him about the hours spent in makeup chairs, watching her own face disappear behind a mask of perfection. The more the world loved the mask, the more the real woman, the one who read poetry and wanted a home, felt herself disappearing. To the men who ran the movie studios, she was not a person. She was a product to be sold and traded. She described meetings where executives talked about her body as if she were not in the room, like people appraising a piece of property. She spoke of her deep desire to be a mother, a dream that had been taken from her repeatedly by a body as fragile as her mind. It was the confession of someone who had reached the top of the world only to find it was the coldest, loneliest place imaginable. She described the shadows that followed her everywhere, men in suits who stood at the edge of film sets and black cars that stayed outside her house long after dark. She looked around the empty diner with fear, worried that the walls themselves were recording her secrets. She told Elias she was being targeted because she wanted to have a voice and a mind in a world that only wanted her to look pretty. Then she reached into her handbag. "There is a reason they are watching me," she whispered, leaning closer. "It is all in these pages." She pulled out a small red leather book. The atmosphere at the table changed instantly. As she placed the book between them, she pulled her hand back quickly, as if the leather were burning her. She whispered the names written inside, initials belonging to powerful men in Washington. She spoke of the brothers who were treated like royalty and how they had treated her as a disposable toy. The diary was a record of promises made in private and broken in public. It contained secrets that were never supposed to leave the rooms where they were whispered. She gripped the table, her eyes darting toward the diner entrance. She told Elias she had been used as a pawn in a power game she never wanted to join. They assumed she was too distracted by her fame to notice what was happening, but she had documented everything, the meetings, the phone calls, and the true motivations of the men in charge. As she was about to push the book toward him, headlights flashed across the window. She flinched, her body shaking with visible terror. She whispered that they were always there, waiting for her to make a mistake. The red leather was worn and stained, a small monument to a life lived under constant surveillance. She looked at Elias, her chin trembling. She asked him about his own life. If he had a family or a girl he wanted to marry, it was a strange, human moment. The most famous woman in the world was showing interest in a young man living in a one-room apartment. But the danger was still there. Elias saw a man across the street in the shadows lighting a cigarette. Marilyn spoke of her childhood and a dream of a simple life. She admitted the only thing she truly wanted was to be loved for who she was, not for her image. Elias felt her isolation. He realized she was desperate to be seen as a human being. She held his hand for a second, a silent thank you that felt more important than any speech. She gave him a small smile, but it vanished when they heard a car door slam outside. The diner door opened and cold air rushed in. 2 men in dark suits entered, their boots loud on the floor. Marilyn did not turn around. She tensed up, her shoulders rising as she tried to make herself small, like the girl who used to hide in closets. The men moved with purpose, their eyes scanning the room. They were not fans, they were professional. Elias felt the blood drain from his face as he realized they were trapped. Marilyn's face suddenly changed. The vulnerability disappeared, replaced by the mask of the Hollywood star. She started to laugh, a hollow sound used to signal that everything was fine. Under the table, she worked quickly. She slid the red diary into Elias' satchel, her fingers touching his arm. It was a fast, silent transfer of a dangerous burden. She leaned in, keeping the fake smile for the men, but her eyes were pleading. She whispered that he had to go, take the book, and run. The men reached the booth. One of them put a hand on the seat and told her it was time to go home. It was not a request. She stood up, smoothed her coat, and gave Elias a look that would stay with him for the rest of his life. As the men moved in on either side of her, she seemed to find a sudden strength. Elias stayed frozen as they led her away. As she walked toward the door, her heels clicked on the floor like a countdown. Before she left, she turned her head just enough for him to see her. She did not say anything, but her lips moved in a silent plea to remember her. The rain was pouring outside. A man opened the door of a black sedan, and it looked like a dark hole waiting to swallow her. Marilyn stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at the sky before stepping into the car. The door shut with a loud bang. The engine started, and the car disappeared into the mist, leaving Elias alone in the diner. Elias did not go to sleep. He sat in his kitchen and watched the sun come up with the red diary on the table in front of him. The morning was very quiet. The news came as a low report on the radio. When the announcer voice broke, Elias knew what had happened. They were reporting that she was no longer with us. They claimed she was alone in Brentwood and had ended her own life. The headlines were already being made, turning the woman he had just spoken with into a tragic story. He went to his window and saw people crying on the street. To the world, an icon was gone. To Elias, a person he had just begun to know, was lost. He remembered her strength and knew she had not planned to expire. If this story of hidden Hollywood history is gripping you so far, please take a second to hit the like button as it helps more people discover this forgotten truth. She had planned to tell the truth. He realized he was a young man holding the only proof that her loss was something more than it seemed. He opened the diary and saw her handwriting, elegant and full of life. The pages showed she was a woman of deep thought. She wrote about philosophy and power, showing a mind that was much sharper than people realized. There were notes about her dreams and her fears of being forgotten. The diary was a portrait of a person the world had tried to simplify. He tried to write the story, but every time he started, his phone would ring and then hang up. It was a constant reminder that he was being watched. He spent weeks in fear, with the diary hidden under a floorboard. He watched as the news turned her into a caricature of a broken star. Every time he thought about going to a newspaper, a black car would appear near his apartment. He realized the people involved were protecting a system. He received a photo of his mother's house in the mail, a warning that telling the truth would put his family in danger. He sat in the dark, holding the book, feeling like he had failed her. He eventually moved away, changed his name, and took a quiet job in a library, but he never forgot that night in the diner. For years, Elias lived a double life. On the surface, he was a quiet librarian who kept to himself. Beneath that, he was a man guarding a secret that could destroy reputations. He spent his nights studying the initials in the diary, connecting the dots between the powerful men she had known. He realized the web of influence was even larger than he had first thought. It was a map of how power actually worked in the country. The red leather of the diary became old and brittle, but the words stayed clear. Elias watched as the men mentioned in the book lived long, successful lives. He saw them win awards and give speeches about morality, knowing all the while that he had the evidence of their true character. This secret knowledge was the only thing he had. He began to worry about what would happen to the truth after he was gone. He saw how the world continued to use her image for profit while ignoring the woman she actually was. He knew that if he did not act, the people who silenced her would win. They would succeed in burying Norma Jean forever. He started writing his own detailed account of that night. He wrote about the cold air in the diner and the exact way she looked when she handed him the book. He wanted to provide a record that could not be ignored. He worked on it by hand, avoiding computers or anything that could be traced. He felt like he was finally standing up to the shadows. He realized his job was not just to hide the book, but to make sure it survived. He made copies and hid them in different places, inside old books in the library and buried in archives. He was a bridge between her voice and the future. Now, at 91 years old, he knows his time is short. He still thinks about the diner and the smell of the rain. He looks at his hands and realizes the story has to be told before it is too late. If he does not speak now, her memory will be lost to history. In a nursing home, an old man sits with a red diary and a photo of a woman. Elias feels the leather and can almost smell the coffee from that night. He knows he cannot carry the secret anymore. He calls his granddaughter over. She has a kind face, much like the one Marilyn had seen in him. He pulls the diary out and starts to tell her the story, not about a movie star, but about a woman who was afraid and wanted to be heard. As he speaks, the image of Marilyn Monroe changes for his granddaughter. She sees a human being who was caught in a dangerous world. He tells her about her favorite flowers and the poems she wrote. His granddaughter is moved by the story and realizes the weight of what she's hearing. Elias feels a sense of relief. He has finally kept his promise. She is more than a poster on a wall. She's a real person with a real story. The room is quiet as his granddaughter reads the words. Marilyn Monroe did not just disappear in Brentwood. She lived on in the mind of a man who would not let her be forgotten. The truth might be hidden for a long time, but once it comes out, it cannot be stopped. Think about what you would have done if you were in that diner. What would you have said to a woman who was that alone? We want to hear your thoughts in the comments. The secret Marilyn held was not just about political dirt. It was about her struggle to be seen as more than a product. The people who wanted the diary wanted to erase her identity. By protecting the book, Elias protected her humanity. Each page proves that her voice was stronger than the people trying to quiet it. The world often sees her through the lens of fame, but now we can see her through the lens of truth. The Red Diary is a reminder that the truth eventually finds a way out. No matter how much effort is put into hiding it, facts remain. As we finish this story, remember that the blonde bombshell was just a part she played. Norma Jean was the reality. Her story did not end in 1962. It continued through the person she chose to trust. That story now belongs to everyone. We should honor her by listening to what she had to say. The Red Diary is a sign of resistance. It stands against the official versions of her life. It encourages us to look deeper and not just accept what we are told. In the end, her most important moment was not on a film set. It was in a quiet booth in a diner, making sure the truth would last longer than the fame. As the years passed, Elias became a student of the era. He read every book released about her, every final account of her, and every collection of her photos. He saw how the same few stories were recycled: the substances, the depression, the failed marriages. He saw how authors speculated on her state of mind without ever having heard her real voice. He felt a quiet, simmering rage that the world was content with a tragedy when they could have had a triumph of the spirit. He remembered her discussing her favorite poets. She had a deep affinity for those who felt like outsiders, those who struggled to fit into a world that demanded conformity. She spoke of how poetry was the only place where words did not have to be perfect, just honest. This was a side of her the public never saw. The intellectual, the seeker, the woman who was constantly trying to educate herself in a town that only valued her appearance. Elias realized that the men in the black sedans had not just been protecting their own secrets. They were protecting the status of the system itself. They could not allow a woman like her to be seen as intelligent or politically active. If she were more than a blonde bombshell, she became a threat to the established order. By painting her as unstable and tragic, they effectively neutralized her message. They turned a whistleblower into a victim. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, Elias lived in a state of constant vigilance. He never stayed in one apartment for more than a few years. He never used a credit card if he could avoid it. He lived a ghost-like existence, a man shaped by a single night in 1962. He often wondered what his life would have been like if the phone had not rung. He might have stayed a reporter, perhaps won a Pulitzer, or lived a normal, noisy life in the city. But instead, he was the silent guardian of a red book. He recalled the specific way she held her pen. In the diary, there were places where the ink was smudged, likely by her own tears or the dampness of the California night. He could see the urgency in her handwriting, the way the letters leaned forward, racing toward the edge of the page. It was the writing of someone who knew they were running out of time. She was not writing for history. She was writing to stay sane. One of the most striking things in the diary was her description of the perfect day. She wrote about wanting to wake up in a house where the air smelled like salt and cedar, with no phone calls, no scripts, and no one waiting for her to perform. She wanted to walk on a beach where no one knew her name. It was a simple, heartbreaking dream that she was never allowed to achieve. The world would not let her be ordinary. Elias also noted the names of people who had actually been kind to her. They were rarely the big names of Hollywood. They were the makeup artists who held her hand when she was nervous, the drivers who kept her secrets, and the orphanages she quietly donated to. These were the people she trusted, the ones who saw Norma Jean and did not try to change her. These were the connections that kept her going when the rest of the world felt like a battleground. By the time he reached the nursing home, Elias had become at peace with his choice. He knew he had sacrificed his own ambitions to protect hers. He felt a deep bond with the woman in the photo, a connection that had lasted a lifetime. He was not just holding a book, he was holding a piece of her soul. When he finally handed it to his granddaughter, he felt a lightness he had not known since he was 22. The granddaughter, Sarah, was a history teacher. She understood the significance of the documents. She saw the initials and the dates and realized that her grandfather was not just telling a story. He was handing her a historical bombshell. She felt the weight of the responsibility and promised her grandfather that she would find a way to make the truth known without endangering their family. They spent hours going through the pages together. Elias explained the context of each entry, identifying the people and the events she had described. It was a private masterclass in the hidden history of the 20th century. Sarah was amazed by the complexity of the woman her grandfather described. She saw the intelligence and the bravery that had been edited out of the public record. Elias told her about the final kiss Marilyn had given him on the cheek, a cold, fleeting touch that tasted of rain and fear. He told her about the way the men in the suits had looked at him, with a chilling indifference, as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture in the diner. He wanted her to understand the reality of the forces they were dealing with. This was not a movie, it was a life. As he reached the end of his story, Elias felt a sense of closure. He had been a witness to the truth, and now there was another witness. The chain of silence had been broken. He could finally close his eyes and not worry about the red book. He knew it was in good hands. He knew that one day the world would finally have to listen to the real voice of Norma Jean. The legacy of that night is a reminder that we often do not know the full story of the people we admire. We see the highlights, the glamour, and the tragedy, but we rarely see the human being in the middle of it all. Marilyn Monroe was a person who fought to be heard in a world that wanted her to stay quiet. Her diary is her final victory over the people who tried to control her. We invite you to think about the people in your own life who might be carrying secrets. How often do we truly listen to the voices beneath the surface? The story of the Red Diary is a call to be more observant, to be more compassionate, and to value the truth over the image. Thank you for being part of this journey into the past. We hope it has given you a new perspective on a woman, the world. Thought it new. Stay tuned for more stories that challenge the official history and bring the voices of the silenced into the light. The truth is out there, waiting to be found. In his final days, Elias often sat by the window watching the birds. He thought about her bird in a gilded cage metaphor. He felt that in his own way he had helped her fly. He had taken her words and kept them safe, ensuring they did not perish with her. He felt a profound sense of gratitude for that 3 a.m. phone call. It had given his life a purpose he never could have imagined. He passed away quietly in his sleep, a smile on his face. He was no longer the young, terrified reporter. He was the man who had kept a promise to a legend, and in the end, that was more than enough. The Red Diary, now in Sarah's care, waited for the right moment to speak to the world. And when it finally does, it will change everything we think we know about the woman who just wanted to be loved. The impact of such a revelation is hard to overstate. It is not just about one woman's life. It is about the accountability of those in power. It is about the way history is constructed and who gets to decide what is remembered. The Red Diary is a challenge to all of us to be more critical of the stories we are told. It reminds us that the truth is often much more complicated and much more human than the legend. As the story of Elias and the Red Diary concludes, we are left with a powerful image of a man and a woman connected across time by a shared secret. It is a story of courage, loyalty, and the enduring power of the truth. Marilyn Monroe's voice, once whispered in a dark diner, is now ready to be heard by the world. And it is a voice that will never be silenced again. She documented the interactions with a clarity that was terrifying. She knew that taking someone's life was a concept these men viewed only as a strategic necessity, not a moral failure. She wrote about how they would speak of fatal encounters in other countries with the same boredom they used for lunch orders. This was the world she had accidentally entered, and the Red Diary was her only shield. Elias realized that the fatal ending reported by the papers was a fabrication designed to protect these interests. They needed her gone because she was a witness to the rot at the center of the dream. By terminating her influence, they hoped to obliterate her truth, but they forgot about the young man in the diner. They forgot about the broken satchel and the red book. Statistics show that in Hollywood during that era, significant percentages of performers felt immense pressure from studios, with some records suggesting over 60% of contract players experience mental health struggles due to the system. Among these, women often face the brunt of prejudice based on gender, a systemic issue where their intellectual contributions were ignored in favor of their visual appeal. Furthermore, investigations into mysterious passings of celebrities often encounter missing evidence. In cases like this, it is estimated that vital documentation vanishes in up to 30% of high-profile inquiries involving figures linked to political circles. This data highlights the uphill battle Elias faced in preserving the truth against a machine built to silence it. The Norma Jean struggle was a reflection of a wider prejudice. She was a victim of a gender-biased industry that refused to see her as a peer. But in the pages of that diary, she fought back. She used her mind to record the very things they thought she was too simple to understand. That is the real power of her story. It is a triumph of the individual over the institution. As Elias looked at the initials of those who had caused harm to her spirit, he knew that his silence was his greatest weapon. By waiting, he ensured the story would outlive the villains. He ensured that when the truth was finally told, there would be no one left to suppress it. If you believe this story deserves to be heard by a wider audience, please share this video with a friend who loves history. If you believe that the real story of Norma Jean deserves to be remembered, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. By joining our community, you help ensure that these hidden truths are never buried again. Do not forget to turn on notifications so you can join us for every new chapter as we uncover the stories the world tried to forget.